They are the X-Men. Nightcrawler, Cyclops, Wolverine, Colossus, Storm, and Phoenix. In many ways, they are the best humanity has to offer. And for a moment, all is well in their madcap, helter-skelter world. None are aware that it is merely the calm before the Holocaust. Hey everyone, if you want to see more reviews of comic books and comic related news, be sure to subscribe to our channel and check out our Patreon page in the video description below. So I wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about the Dark Phoenix Saga. After 2 movies and an entire season of the 90s X-Men animated cartoon series, this story arc has gotten a lot of attention over the years, perhaps more than any other single comic book storyline. So what's the big deal with it anyways? Well, it all starts back in the year 1980. At this time, the X-Men have hit their stride thanks to Chris Claremont and John Byrne, and had never been more popular than they were at this point in history. Already, thanks to a recent different story arc called the Phoenix Saga, where Jean Grey first gained her formidable Phoenix powers and identity, there was a demand for follow-up among the fan community that existed at the time. In response, the creative minds behind Marvel decided to present the Phoenix and Jean Grey like they had never done before. And so the Dark Phoenix Saga was first conceived of. It began shortly after a battle with a villain named Proteus. The X-Men were left exhausted, but experienced that peaceful moment described at the beginning of this video. But all is not well for these characters. The villain Mastermind, going by the name Jason Weingard, has been reaching out telepathically to Jean Grey, sending her into a fantasy of living on a ship 200 years ago with him. Jason is doing this on behalf of the Hellfire Club, a group of villainous mutants with deep influence across the world that want to recruit Jean into their ranks. Jean sees through these illusions created by Jason, but mistakes them as some sort of function of the seemingly limitless power of the Phoenix. Before she can explore this any further, she is pulled out of the illusion when Scott Summers approaches her. The two have been through a lot recently, as per normal for them and this era of soap opera style drama within the X-Men, as Jean was thought dead for a while in the time since the Phoenix Saga, and only now are the two able to reconcile and begin a relationship once more. Meanwhile, the X-Men split up into 2 teams to recruit 2 new mutants that have been detected, Kitty Pryde and Dazzler. The team that approaches Kitty Pryde are promptly captured by the Hellfire Club and one of their leaders, the White Queen Emma Frost. And the first issue of the Dark Phoenix Saga ends with this new character, Kitty Pryde, using her powers to quietly follow the villains and the captured X-Men. The rest of the X-Men find Dazzler before they too are attacked by the Hellfire Club. Mastermind begins to force Jean Grey into accepting her new identity as the Black Queen of the Hellfire Club, and even gets her to kiss him right in front of a dismayed Cyclops. However, thanks to Dazzler, these X-Men manage to escape capture. Pryde, at this point only 13, barely escapes the Hellfire Club when she runs into Dazzler and the other X-Men. Thanks to Kitty, the gathered team of mutants are able to find their captured friends, and they all try to escape together. But when Jean Grey and Emma Frost confront one another, the Phoenix emerges, nearly overwhelming Emma. The White Queen barely escapes with her life, and the X-Men then take Kitty Pryde home, where they encounter her distraught parents. While they yell at Professor Xavier, Jean gets fed up with the affair and telepathically manipulates Kitty's father into calming down and becoming a fan of the X-Men. Both Cyclops and Storm notice this and are disturbed by the behavior. Though Scott tries to shake the feeling off, Aurora knows better. Something is wrong with their friend. Cyclops redirects the X-Men on the way home to meet up with their friend Angel to ask him about the Hellfire Club, of which he is a member. Warren is shocked at the very idea of them attacking the X-Men, having only ever viewed the club as some old relic he inherited from his parents. Cyclops is worried there is a leak among their team, given how the Hellfire Club has been ahead of them at every turn, and mentions his growing concerns about Jean when she appears before them. She insists that her and Summers take a moment to enjoy a picnic together, though Scott can't help but note how Jean is now apparently able to change her outfit at will by manipulating the molecules around her. When she removes Scott's visor, much to his alarm, he is surprised to find Jean is able to use her powers to block his optic blasts. Weeks later, the X-Men attempt to infiltrate the Hellfire Club, only for Mastermind to once again co-opt Jean Grey. When the X-Men try to intervene, they each fall to the powerful leader Sebastian Shaw, a cyborg named Donald Pierce, and another mutant named Henry Leland, who can affect the mass of those around him. Standing over the defeated X-Men, the Hellfire Club then toasts their newest member, the Black Queen, Jean Grey. The only X-Men left standing is Wolverine, knocked into the sewers by Henry. Logan goes solo, clawing his way through the Hellfire Club's minions, while the captured X-Men, particularly Scott, unsuccessfully try to reach out to Jean Grey. When Logan arrives, Jean is able to help Scott and the X-Men escape. She then confronts Jason Weingard, and, in revenge for his manipulation, exposes Mastermind to her connection to the power cosmic. This vast, omnipotent knowledge overwhelms Jason's mind, and he is left catatonic. When Scott finds her, he can tell something is still wrong, but all she says is that Jason has been taken care of. He has the X-Men flee, with Scott aware that whatever is wrong with Jean goes beyond the Hellfire Club, but he is too late to do anything about that. She transforms in front of the gathered X-Men, having become the Dark Phoenix. Witness the birth of a god. Her name is Jean Grey, a young woman of extraordinary beauty, strength, courage, passion. A superpowered mutant telepath telekinetic, a charter member of the Uncanny X-Men. None of that has changed, and yet, everything has changed. The Phoenix strikes out at the X-Men, and they are no match for her incredible and growing powers. Elsewhere, a little earlier, Sebastian Shaw leaves his club. To the outside world, it looks like the X-Men attacked an innocent group, but Shaw knows that he underestimated the young mutants, and it cost him both Jason Weingard and Henry Leland in the ensuing fray. A senator named Robert Kelly offers Shaw his condolences. Kelly demands law enforcement arrest the X-Men, and an officer of the NYPD responds that they are simply not equipped to handle something like that. Shaw comments that the Sentinel program would be perfect for situations just like this. The men are then alarmed to see the Phoenix Force building in the distance. All around the world, heroes detect the rise of this boundless cosmic being. Jean has become so powerful she threatens not just Earth but the entire cosmos, making it all the more concerning when she leaves her homeworld and flies out into space. Beast watches this from orbit on board an Avengers Quinjet. He follows Jean's path to her point of origin and rescues the downed X-Men. Beast covers for his old team by erasing evidence of the police calling the Avengers about the X-Men's actions. Scott notes the kind act, hoping one day he can make it up to Hank for this, as Cyclops knows his old friend loves being an Avenger and didn't risk his position on the coveted team so easily. Back at Warren's home, Professor Xavier confers with Moira McTaggart about the appearance of the Phoenix. Angel notes that both of these mutant experts seem profoundly worried about what they have seen so far. The professor explains to Warren that this level of power would corrupt anyone. Jean has reached her ultimate level at such a young age she might not be able to properly control her abilities. Xavier, feeling responsible for her situation, says he and Warren must take off for New York immediately, so they can make things right at any cost. Far, far away in space, Jean arrives in another galaxy. Traveling this far required more power than she anticipated, and though she is strong and growing stronger, for the moment she needs more energy. Her power is still finite, at least for now. Without a thought for the consequences, Jean flies into a sun and consumes it. The star would have lived for billions of years. 11 planets orbited it, including one inhabited world, a peaceful and ancient race. Many saw a light that filled the entire sky. It would be the last thing they would ever see. The Phoenix is in ecstasy, but this is only a beginning, a fraction of what it felt when her cosmic powers first emerged within the legendary artifact called the Macran Crystal. She craves that level of power and will do anything to achieve it. Little does Jean know she is being watched by one of the most powerful alien empires in all the universe. The Shiar have observed Jean's actions and move in to strike. An Imperial battlecruiser, one of the deadliest vessels the Empire has ever seen, closes in on the mutant. The newly crowned Empress Lilandra is called and informed of the Phoenix, but the battle is already over by the time she is patched in with the cruiser. The Phoenix has crippled the vessel, and it only has a moment to say goodbye to the Empress before the ship is completely destroyed. Lilandra recognizes the attacker as the Phoenix and knows it must be dealt with at any cost. Back on Earth, as the X-Men regroup, Scott can feel the presence of Jean Grey, thanks to a latent psychic connection between the two. Alarmed, he informs the others that Jean is returning home and is hungry. At the Imperial Center, the ruling seat of the Shiar, whose empire extends over half the known universe, the powerful Grand Council of Shiar ministers watch as the Phoenix Force returns to Earth. Their ruler Lilandra declares that if this universe is to survive, the Phoenix must be destroyed. Jean Grey lands on Earth, confronting her family, but she is soon attacked by the X-Men, who try to use a scrambling device to dampen her powers. During the battle, Jean has a brief moment of lucidity and begs Logan at the end of this, while the human part of her is still in control. However, the Dark Phoenix quickly overcomes the Scrambler and freezes all the X-Men in place with her telepathy. This gives Scott a chance to talk to his longtime love, and he starts to reach out to her, only for Xavier to arrive and attack with his own formidable mental abilities. And the two then engage in a massive telepathic battle with one another. Xavier is able to lock Jean's Phoenix persona away thanks to Jean's own side of her personality, helping Charles along the way. Jean returns to normal and she embraces Scott. The X-Men are approached by Jean's family, who try and help Jean, only for the entire gathered team of mutants to vanish before the family's eyes. The X-Men have been taken by the Shiar, and the gathered group of aliens demand the Phoenix be destroyed. Jean wiped out an entire solar system and a Shiar warship and must answer to these crimes. The X-Men are shocked to learn of Jean's actions, having been completely unaware of them, but only Scott fully appreciates the complicated psychology going on behind the Dark Phoenix. When possessed by the Phoenix, she was an unrepentant murderer, but now Jean can barely come to terms with her own recent actions. Charles intervenes as he knows Shiar law well and demands Jean's fate be decided by duel. The intergalactic community agrees to these terms, and the next day the duel begins. The Imperial Guard is ordered to square off against the X-Men until one team is defeated. The mutants are transported to the blue area of Earth's moon, a strange place of ruins with a normal, Earth-like environment. The X-Men and the Imperial Guard battle and engage in this strange land. After a prolonged fight, Jean is forced to tap into her powers heavily, and the Phoenix re-emerges. Lilandra panics, and Charles agrees with her to abandon the duel and contain the situation by any means necessary. Xavier contacts Scott and tells him to attack Jean while he still has a chance of doing some damage to her before her powers fully reawaken. Scott tries to knock some debris on her, and soon the rest of the X-Men join in trying to drain Jean's powers. This manages to work and the transformation is aborted, and Jean regains control. At least for now. But she better understands herself and realizes her true nature because of this experience. Her and the Phoenix are symbiotes and cannot exist without the other. There is no separating, controlling, or removing this cosmic power. So she begs her friends to kill her before inevitably she kills them. When they refuse, Jean shows them that she's already transforming back to the Phoenix, and the Dark Phoenix will certainly follow. There's no stopping this. Wanting no more deaths on her conscience, she freezes Scott in place, walks up to him, and removes his visor. even as he begs her not to. She only says that she loves him. Scott's optic energy completely destroys Jean's body, and Summers is left devastated, along with the rest of the X-Men. And that's it for the original Dark Phoenix saga. I do have to say, in the context of revisiting this to better understand the context of how one storyline could get so much attention from the fanbase and even the film industry, this is one heck of an X-Men story. It's amazingly well drawn and deeply evocative in its artwork. Jean's death is remarkably well done in that regard in particular, but the whole thing is like that. John Byrne doesn't make the violence of Jean's death all that obvious either, and he's pretty subtle in how he puts that page together. And in the end, it's just this haunting result. He's a huge part of why the Dark Phoenix saga works. In a big story with 2 new mutants who would go on to become major X-Men, the Hellfire Club making this big play, and finally the unexpected and devastating breakdown of a core founding member of the X-Men, this story arc kinda has everything. Perhaps what is most impressive about all of this is that everything we know about this story behind the scenes does not suggest it was all that easy for the creators behind this comic. There was a lot of debate about the nature of Jean's character relative to the Phoenix Force, with editor Jim Shooter and Chris Claremont not agreeing on how much the Phoenix was a separate entity against Jean Grey's own troubled psychology. The debate went back and forth throughout production of the Dark Phoenix saga, to the extent a large portion of the final issue was redone to accommodate some last-minute decisions. Given all that debate, it's amazing how little that is felt in the actual comics themselves. Chris Claremont does an excellent job in navigating all of this conflict, and did an even better job at making the nature of Jean's transformation ambiguous. With stuff like an apparent death and Mastermind brainwashing her, it's unclear what exactly happened to Jean in this storyline, even after all these decades of X-Men comics that would follow. To the credit of the many X-Men writers that would follow Claremont, it's always been pretty unclear what the nature of the Phoenix Force truly is. We know that it's about as powerful as Galactus, and about as ambivalent towards the death of an entire planet's worth of people as Galactus is. Sometimes the Phoenix has been vicious in its path of destruction. Other times it's been directly responsible for saving the mutant race. The Phoenix and its nature has never been clearly stated, which is exactly how I like it. That it is this mysterious and unpredictable force makes it scary, which is great. It's by far one of the most appealing aspects of the Phoenix Force. Now, all that being said, is the story so great that it deserves 2 movies and a full season of animated television? And it's particularly weird that even though there's been 2 movies that have adapted this storyline, both movies have left so much of the original comic out in their goals and ambition. It makes me wonder why this story in particular was so attractive to Fox back when they were in charge of this sort of thing. I suspect, at least in part, this is because this story is full of stuff Hollywood loves. Classic tragedy, romance, and most importantly, a powerful woman being put in her place. The shame of that last particular point is that Chris Claremont as a writer was never like that at all. Jean Grey is brainwashed and turns violently evil after getting a massive power-up for no apparent reason. But those sorts of things were perfectly normal by the standards of X-Men at this point in time. The fact that Jean is a woman is incidental. Claremont spent much of his time with the X-Men tying them up, making them go through laboriously complicated soap opera level drama, and having them go through all sorts of weird transformations. Hell, all of these things happened to other members of the team in the Dark Phoenix saga. And it truly didn't matter whether they were men or women. People have actually gone through Claremont's comics and counted up the number of times men and women were captured and held in bondage, and it actually happened slightly more to men. That is what Chris Claremont was all about, using comic book tropes in creative ways to not abandon them entirely, but to break barriers when it came to how men and women were treated in these comics and their tropes. And the best part of all of it was he did it in both directions. Female characters got to have more agency and be stronger main heroes in a story, while men were allowed to be vulnerable and even weak in moments of crises. You'd be surprised at how rare these things were in earlier comics. But even by the relatively high standards I hold Chris Claremont's comics, I do have to say the Dark Phoenix Saga really did come across as special in revisiting it here. Because while Chris Claremont had already been doing a lot of the things I had been just talking about, in terms of the quality and how it dealt with its characters, this story arc did something new that hadn't been done by Claremont, or really by a lot of comic book writers at this point, that was hotly contested behind the scenes, because they straight up killed Jean Grey. This wasn't like today where that sort of decision is basically mundane, and had been done 100 times before already. This was at the time basically breaking rule number 1 at Marvel. You were never supposed to kill off a main character like that. But they did it anyways. That was part of the debate going on behind the scenes, and now it's one of the better remembered X-Men stories. I think there is a lesson there, though it should be noted now, if Marvel were to kill off a main character like this, most fans wouldn't even notice. And that's kind of where I stand with the Dark Phoenix Saga. It's a groundbreaking story in an already groundbreaking creative run. It's a sort of legend on top of another legend, and very much deserves the praise it receives, even though, if by today's standards, this story wouldn't really be doing anything new. In part, that's because the Dark Phoenix Saga did a lot of those tropes and ideas first. Let me know what you all think in the comments section below. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and keep reading comics.